The mysterious woman ran with great speed and practice that belied her apparent age. In any other circumstance, she may have outrun the Red Prince with ease, especially that she was not expecting to run through a crowded library and then through dark hallways. However, the woman's running also couldn't stop her screaming, wordlessly and with great pain. The kind of scream that came from a place of intense pain. The Red Prince had heard many screams in her life. Fear, happiness, anxiety, from being overwhelmed, from being underwhelmed. Pain, pleasure, from the cold, from the heat. Screams from the beginning and the ends of life. Screams that occurred from beyond life or death, in so many variations and so many mixes of all of those screams. So she was certain that this was from a place of confusion and pain. The woman didn't recognize where she was or what was happening, only that she was in pain and that she needed to escape it. Red was very familiar with this kind of scream. The woman would need help, and that was more important than the case, but odds are this would also help her case. As she pursued the woman down the hallways, as the woman ran into the employee-only section of the Outpost Hotel, and Red followed, mere meters behind. She slammed open the door to the employee stairwell, and she heard the woman's voice echo from below. Taking the stairs two at a time, the Red Prince made it down the first flight before she could make it no further. The stairs were gated off with a mesh of metal that at first she thought was black iron. Running her hand across the metal, she realized it was something else. The metal was as cold as ice, and it was rough to the touch, like cast iron. But cast iron didn't feel this dense. Something was very wrong with the metal. It smelled like copper, but it didn't bend like copper. And the metal was dense, and as dense as cast iron was, it wasn't quite this dense. The only metals that she knew about that were this dense were not safe to the touch. Red removed her hand at this thought and looked closely at the lock on the gate. It was very old, and that was clear from the mold forming around the keyhole. If Red was to guess, the mold was decades old, but the metal itself looked untarnished and untouched by time. Taking the brass key out, she inserted it into the old keyhole and twisted it. Nothing. The key wasn't made for this lock. Clearly, there was something past here she wasn't made to see if the key Crystal gave her was not enough to open the lock. So, the Red Prince put the key away and peered through the bars the best she could to look down the steps. The stairs, in sharp contrast to the mysteriously mighty metal mesh, were definitely aged and looked like they should be condemned. The concrete was more gravel than concrete, and the rebar was rusted and near useless. How the woman got down the steps without tetanus or falling was beyond Red. She glanced at the wall, hoping for something that might come in handy. The wall just beyond the mesh was in faded yellow paint and marked it as Outpost 13, Sublevel 1. These stairs weren't a part of the hotel, they were a part of the fort. They were probably fenced away for the safety of guests and staff. So the question remained, how did the woman get past the gate? The worst part of the experience wasn't the gate, nor the stairs. It was the fact the woman's scream still echoed up to the Red Prince. It grew further and further away, for sure, but she was still certain the woman was still screaming and still running, getting further away.
Come on, Red, think!
Marceline whispered to herself behind her mask before she cleared her throat and calmly walked up the stairs rather than down. If there was a down and an up, Maybe something above would tell her about what lies below. As above and so below, and all that. The stairs up here were in much better shape. The first few flights were concrete steel, but then they were covered in worn but warm red carpet. The higher she went, the brighter and cleaner it got until the final floor. The top floor had a single unmarked door. Trying the doorknob and realizing it was unlocked, Red Prince opened it and began to step into the room. It was an office, a row of filing cabinets and an untouched carpet. Red took a quiet step inside and took an additional step, waiting for something to happen. When nothing did, she continued to the filing cabinets. They were marked alphabetically but were otherwise unmarked. A perfect place to find more information. An almost too perfect place to hold information. Red hesitated just in front of the desk, while she peered behind herself and let herself feel everything around her. She could smell the distinct smell of rusty pipes, but she couldn't hear anything but her own desperate heartbeat. And as much of a bad feeling the room was giving her, she had no reason to distrust the room either. So, pushing down her anxiety and paranoia of the room, Red Prince strode past the desk confidently and checked the filing cabinets. Starting at Z and working her ways towards A, the Red Prince checked all of the file names to see if she could find anything interesting. The cabinets were surprisingly empty, and none of the few files had anything that interested her. At least until she made it to B. And then she found a single file that was marked with something that caused Red's breath to catch in her throat.
Black Moon Prison?
She whispered to herself as she snatched up the file and opened it eagerly. She knew almost nothing about Black Moon Prison, but the rumors of what it contained was something that she knew was worth investigating. The very idea of a possible cure for her parents' curse was enough to make her forget the case and the possible dangers of the Outpost Hotel. Tearing open the file and almost ripping the folder from her speed, she read the words on the page as her heart sunk from what she saw. A click was heard as the door was closed and then locked. She didn't even need to check it. She knew that it was closed. When the walls began to rumble and slowly close in, the Red Prince dropped the file and the single piece of paper within that read, "Caught you." Red Prince quickly glanced at the walls as they grinded and moaned as they closed slowly on her.
What in the flying fairies ass crack?
Red Prince said while glancing at the walls and trying to find a way out. First, she tried the obvious and tried kicking at where the doorknob was on the door, one of the weakest points of the door. But even with her esoterically enhanced strength, the door didn't shake in the door jamb. So she would have to try something else. Maybe the walls were an illusion, she thought as she ran to them all, quickly giving them all a firm smack. There was only a sting in her hand and the loud smack as the walls only got closer. So they're not fake, and the way back isn't the way out. What if there wasn't a way out? Then she may have to die in this place. Red Prince heard crashing while the walls finally knocked over the filing cabinets out of the way, leaving a cascade of papers all over the floor, all of which repeated the same two words. "Caught you." The papers mocked her, while Red Prince racked her brain for another way out. If there was no way out, she would have to make her own way out. First, she reached into her pocket to remove her fountain pen and picked up one of the papers. She could make a sigil to open the door. It would be quick. All she would have to do was write the words. But when she tried to write on the paper, the pen didn't write anything. No ink was coming out, no matter how hard she pressed into the paper. The walls closed even closer. Now close enough, if she wanted to, she could stretch both her arms and touch two different walls. If there was no ink, what was she to do? Holding the pen in her hand, she looked down at her wrists. If there was no ink in her pen, she could always provide her own ink. Desperate, Red prepared to press the pen into her skin when a thought occurred to her that gave her pause. A piece of advice her Nama always gave her.
Blood freely given can be freely stolen.
There was a chance, however slight, that whoever was causing these walls to close was aware of that statement and wanted the Red Prince to freely give her blood for their own purposes. A lot of dark magic depended on people giving a willing sacrifice of a part of themselves that led to a loss of the whole. The most powerful spells couldn't depend on body parts that were stolen, lost, or found. It had to be freely given. So, if this was another trick, then the Red Prince would have to outsmart that and think beyond the physical or the metaphysical and begin to think pataphysically. Now looking at her situation with new eyes, the Red Prince examined her situation. The four walls were closing in even more. It would be less than a minute before she was crushed. But that was the least important part of the situation. The way in was standing behind her, and below her were the mocking words of the one who tricked her into the situation. A situation that she walked herself into. If she got herself in, then the way out was something she would have to find for herself. And if there was no way out forward, backwards, leftwards, rightwards, or downwards, you looked upwards. Looking up at the ceiling, the Red Prince could see he barely concealed behind the wallpaper was a square, likely a trapdoor and a way out. Standing on the filing cabinet, the wall almost pressed against her as she took her fountain pen and cut through the paper. Sure enough, it was a trapdoor, and pushing it up, it was locked. Of course it was unlocked, otherwise thinking pataphysically wouldn't have worked. Now pulling herself up, she found herself in a dark and dank room, just as the walls below crushed the filing cabinet, and the Red Prince looked over the room, and she found herself not in just any room, but in the lantern room of the lighthouse. The bulb swung in its internal rotation, and the glass door led to a winding steel stairway that led out of the lantern room and would likely lead back to the hotel. At first, Red Prince was tempted to go outside, but then she paused and looked over the room again. If the way up here was so heavily guarded, and then the way out was so easy, then there was something here she wasn't meant to see. At first, it looked like there wasn't anything in the lantern room, just the lamp itself and the glass panes. The light was far too bright to look at directly, and the floor was normal as far as she could see. But crawling closer to the panes of glass, the Red Prince saw that when the light passed through the glass, something was visible for just a moment. Getting closer to the glass, she waited for the light to pass by, and after it went by, for a moment, the image on the glass remained visible. Red examined the foggy image from a distance, but as she got closer, it got clearer, and for the second time that night, her breath caught in her throat. On the glass were the words, "Help us," written thousands of times, crowding every square centimeter of glass. Every single one was written in a different handwriting, but they all said the same thing. Help us. And the fact that the Red Prince was able to read it properly from the inside didn't mean that whoever wrote it was on the inside of the hotel. Whoever or whatever wrote those lines wrote it on the outside of the lighthouse, trying to get in. Soon afterwards, the Red Prince was standing in front of Crystal Campbell in her office. While Red Prince explained what she found, Crystal only looked bored and continued to fill out her paperwork in front of herself. Apparently, the Outpost Hotel was still a busy place for paperwork, even when nothing was happening. Somehow, that reminded Red Prince of Lieutenant Lou Tennant, always working on paperwork, even when there was no logical reason to.
Someone was down in the old tunnels beneath the Outpost Hotel. I think they might be using it to hide out or even as their own base of operations. I've never knew anyone who responded to the 5-word test that way. And the key you gave me doesn't open that gate. Do you have a key that allows access to the tunnels?
Crystal glanced up at the Red Prince and simply shrugged her shoulders. There is no key down at the old fort. When I inherited the hotel, all of the keys to the old fort were long since lost. Trust me, if they weren't lost, we'd be selling ghost tours down there.
Ghost tours?
Yeah, the old fort is supposedly haunted by the ghosts of soldiers who died. The tunnels used to connect the main fort to the Martello Towers and to the other bunkers. Maybe some of the Martello Towers still connect? I seem to remember that the southern tower was being excavated by archaeologists from Madrigal Inc. a few years ago, Crystal explained.
Wait, it was evacuated? Why isn't it being activated still? Archaeologists aren't exactly known for being scared off by the dead.
Crystal's face scrunched up as she struggled to remember. She stopped working on the paperwork as her eyes closed while she struggled to remember. I don't remember. I think it was too dangerous or something like that.
If it was dangerous, why didn't you evacuate the Outpost Hotel?
Maybe it was only dangerous to the archaeologists? I wouldn't keep the Outpost Hotel open if it was dangerous to everyone, Crystal said. Red remembered the endless scrawls of "Help Us" on the glass and how she already knew that Crystal was a liar. So she may be lying here. Or maybe she's telling the truth, because even liars can tell the truth. Still, though, this led to a new place for the Red Prince to investigate.
So the South Tower is where I should check next. And if it's okay with you, can you guide me to the kitchen so I can make some food for myself?
Oh, yeah. Sure, Crystal said as she guided Red Prince through the halls to the kitchen. The dining room was one of the most haunted rooms that the Red Prince had ever seen. The chandelier reflected what little light there was, and it reflected off all of the white sheets that covered the chairs and tables, casting phantoms, shades, and ghosts throughout the dining room, while Red followed Crystal. While she knew it was safe, something deep in her still felt a lot of fear of this room. This dining room reminded her way too much of the Crossroads Dinner Theater. When the door to the kitchen opened, Red more than half expected Mr. Knight to be standing behind the door with his faceless smile. But no. It was a normal, large kitchen with stainless steel appliances and tables. Crystal gestured to the large walk-in freezer and fridge and to the cabinets over the oven. There's still some food in the freezer and some spices over the oven. Normally I don't do this, but this is not normal circumstances, Crystal said before turning to walk away.
Wait, you're not staying?
Marceline squeaked before the Red Prince took over again.
You're just gonna leave me here?
Red Prince asked. Well, I have more paperwork to do, and it's just a kitchen. I'm sure you can handle it, Crystal said as she disappeared into the darkness of the dining room. Red Prince turned back to the quiet kitchen while her shoulders slumped, and she got started. The walk-in fridge had some bread, cheese, and eggs that Red was ready to start cooking on the stove. The kitchen felt spooky. Every noise, no matter how slight, made Red Prince wince. It was like every shadow was judging her and waiting for her to do something that was worth attacking her. But she still grilled the bread and cheese in the pan along with the egg. But when she checked the cupboard, she couldn't find the salt. She found garlic, onion, cinnamon, and various other spices in the cupboard, but no salt. She found where it was supposed to be when the location was marked as being for salt, but the salt itself wasn't there. Still, though, she was able to spice up her egg sandwich with some extra cheese on the side. Leaving her pans in the sink, Red Prince turned away with the sink, with her sandwich and cheese on plate, just in enough time for all the lights to go out. At first, Red simply paused, waiting for the lights to come back on. But after 2 minutes of standing in the dark, the Red Prince whispered the words to bring forth a will-o-wisp to help guide her back to her room. After speaking the words, a small white light appeared a few feet in front of the Red Prince to light up the kitchen. But the light floated mere inches in front of the face of the woman that Red saw earlier.
Who are you?
Red asked the woman, who only stared glassy-eyed at nothing. Red waved her hand in front of her eyes, and they didn't so much as twitch. Normally, she would do the 5-word test, but knowing that last time she ran away, she figured this wasn't the best idea right now. But now that she had a closer look at the woman, she could see the woman had clammy skin, glassy eyes, and an unresponsive state. This matched very closely to a creature of local lore. Breaking off a piece of cheese, she held it out to the woman, offering her some food, while also hoping that the woman didn't lash out, or worse, try to bite the Red Prince.
Here, have some cheese,
Red offered. The woman stared for a moment before reaching her cold hand out as she lifted the cheese to her mouth, and she bit into it and dryly swallowing the cheese. Once eaten, color began to return to the woman's cheeks, and her eyes cleared as she focused first on the light and then on Red as the woman's breaths once again became audible. Red's hypothesis was correct. The lack of salt in the kitchen, the hidden ocean, the woman moving quietly as a shadow, fearing the howl of the black moon, the cold, clammy skin, and apparent illness of body, mind, and soul. These were all the signs that the woman was a zombie, under the influence of a sorcerer. Her mind and body were under the sorcerer's will, but her soul still lived beneath, somewhere. There were 2 major ways of breaking the curse. The first was that the zombie would see the ocean and be free, or that they would taste salt. And with the island surrounded by fog, there was no way to see the ocean. And although the salt was taken from the kitchen, likely from the sorcerer themselves, odds are the sorcerer either didn't know or forgot that salt was also in cheese.
There you go. You're free. Is there anything you need me to do for you?
The Red Prince asked. The woman croaked as she tried to speak with her atrophied vocal cords. It took a few tries, but she was able to get out a breathy whisper.